Complete Health Podcast, the podcast that brings you a complete view of healthcare, exercise as medicine, and much more.
We're your hosts, Helen O'Leary and Reece Noble, both physiotherapists at Complete Physio and Pilates in London. This is episode 4, the first of our 3-part chat with one of our very talented team at Complete, who's both a physiotherapist and clinical Pilates instructor, Annabel Hawker.
Annabel goes in depth on what exactly clinical Pilates is and how she came to utilise it both as a standalone method of helping people, but also how it greatly benefited her as a physiotherapist and with her physiotherapy practice.
This is obviously an area of passion for me, being the director of Complete Pilates, so I really enjoyed this one. It also sounds like we've almost got you wanting to do your Pilates badges, Reece.
Look, it's definitely something that could benefit my physio, so you never know. I hope you all enjoy this one. Hello and welcome to the Complete Health Podcast. I am your host, Reece Noble, here with my co-host, Helen O'Leary.
Good morning.
How are you, Helen?
I'm very good. How are you?
Good. I'm fantastic, actually. Really buzzing off recording number 1 with Chris Myers last week. And this week we're very lucky to have our wonderful physiotherapist, Annabel Hawker, here.
Hi guys, nice to see you.
Nice, thank you for coming in. So as you can hear, Annabel's from my part of the world, from Australia, so we're definitely taking over here. So
I'm feeling outnumbered.
Yeah, Helen definitely outnumbered. So what we're going to go through today with Annabel has a range of skills to her physio toolbox. So we're going to go through 3 different sections with it, much similar as we did with Chris last week. We're going to explore 3 topics of Annabel's interest, get her insights with it, and hopefully everyone is going to learn a little bit along the way.
Let's hope so.
So today's the first one. Today we're going to talk about Pilates, and in particular clinical Pilates. For those of you who know my co-host well, Helen runs Complete Pilates alongside Complete Physio, and Annabel is one of the very skilled practitioners that works on both sides of that coin.
Exactly.
So Helen, before we get going, sorry, I should actually ask Annabel a question first, shouldn't I? Annabel, can you give me your elevator pitch of you? What's your background? How long have you been a physio? All of that type of stuff.
So as you already said, I'm from your part of the world, so from Sydney, and graduated as physio 10 years ago in Sydney. Danced and horse rode my way through school, which meant I spent a lot of time at physiotherapist. So kind of knew what the job entailed, so always knew I wanted to be a physio. And then did my sports masters, finished that last year. Also have a background in Pilates, so have always integrated Pilates into my physio work, because I've been a keen Pilates person, attendee myself for 15 years, but have finished the Polestar training recently, so having that more formal training has been really, really helpful as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, Helen, obviously you're, as I've just said, running up Complete Pilates, and most of yours or many of your clinicians or your Pilates teachers are physiotherapists?
So we're about 50-50. Okay. So we have kind of about half physios, and then we've got some nurses, we've got some soft tissue therapists that have worked for a long time in elite sports. So there's a little bit of a variety. We've also got some sports therapists as well. The kind of overriding factor for us is that even if you're a physio, that doesn't necessarily mean you can teach movement, and it doesn't necessarily mean you can kind of do a full hour in the Pilates studio and know how all the equipment works. So the difficulty with Pilates in the UK particularly is it's not a protected title. Anybody can do it. You can do a 2-day course on the mat and then go and teach equipment Pilates. Someone can just give you a manual. You can just figure out what you want to do and then go and teach it. And that actually happens an awful lot for physios, because a lot of physios will use Pilates as part of their practice because it's a really good base level of movement, and then might take that on the equipment. Whereas all of the guys who work for us, whether they're medical or non-medical, have got extensive training. So most of us will have gone through Polestar. And the difference with Polestar is it's great because it was developed by a physio and a non-physio, so it's a really holistic course. So we look at everything from the types of language that you use, the choice of words, how your words might affect the way someone moves. So if you say to someone, push something, they're going to obviously move with quite a lot of force. Yep. Whereas, if you bring in imagery and all of this kind of stuff, then it will change how they do it. So it looks at all of that side of it, but also then looks and brings into the biomechanics and the real science behind it too. And it also teaches scope of practice. So just because someone's a physio, they might never have seen a spinal fusion before, so probably they shouldn't be working with a spinal fusion 3 weeks after they've just had an operation.
Yep.
But you might have a non-physio who has trained specifically in hypermobility, and that's all they see. And because of their extensive knowledge on how the body should move and can move, then they kind of know what they should be doing. And it's a really long training program, so it's about 6 months just to sit the basic course. And then you're normally given in the UK about 18 months to then sit your exams, which is a 5-part exam. So
Pressure's
it's
on.
really extensive, and unfortunately the pressure is on, and the pass rate is not always high.
It's a good thing though,
Yeah,
because it
really
separates the. I guess we've all been to courses where it's so easy to just fluff through the exam at the end, and then you're qualified to do things. So I think that's.
It is, and it's really important because clinical Pilates is very much, you're dealing with people with acute as well as chronic injuries, and the great thing about being a physio that can do it as well is that we have these manual therapy skills that we can use to do it, and that's really the clinical side. So the clinical side is not just, if someone's fit, healthy, well, and just wants to feel better, move better, that's Pilates, that's your regular normal kind of equipment stuff. But if someone's got a problem, if someone's got a history, if someone's got kind of niggles and aches and pains and is really needing that other level and that understanding of anatomy, physiology, and real biomechanics, that's your clinical Pilates.
It fits in perfectly, doesn't it? The physio training with
really
that
does,
extensive Pilates training.
Yeah.
Cool. So, Annabel, you've been through the Polestar training, as you just said. How do you see that you fit your Pilates training in with your physio training? Like how much are they integrated? How much are they separate?
I suppose, as Helen was saying, Pilates is really, really helpful for looking at someone's overall movement, and I think it really trains you to look at someone's whole body. So obviously, as we'll discuss a bit later, I have done a lot of work with shoulders, but you don't want to just look at someone as their shoulder. So if they're not coming along with their normal rehab, you then look, okay, is there something else going on in the kinetic chain? And I think Pilates definitely helps you focus on that a little bit more. I suppose I danced and I taught dance as well, so I always did look at movement quality a lot more than I think a lot of my colleagues did. So Pilates hasn't changed that as much as maybe it would for some other physios, because that was always something that I looked for, but I think it really does make you aware of how people should be moving, and also why we encourage certain movement patterns in terms of the anatomy, and why we're looking for that with a certain person compared to someone else. So, for example, if someone's really hypermobile, how you might train them a little bit differently to someone who's naturally a lot stiffer. Yeah.
And I think with that as well, so my background is definitely not dance, and I am much more on the stiffer side of movement. But it's understanding, you do a rehab program and you structure something for someone. There's a real, you don't want to go lying to sitting to standing to, you don't want to be bouncing around. There should be a progression, and every exercise actually leads on to the next. So just kind of having that structure, then also going, okay, well, we're doing a squat or a leg press or like a deadlift or something like that, and going, he's not getting it, she's not getting it, why, what's going on? And then the ability to be able to use that equipment and break down some of those movements so people understand the actual kind of how they can achieve that to then load it, is then where you get kind of a really nice crossover.
Yeah. How much do you think you're using it in your, so let's take your Pilates hat off, let's say it's your physio, this is your physio time. I mean, I know for me, more gym-based background, those types of things, I use that extensively with my pretty much every client that I see gets some kind of strength-based exercise. How much of yours are getting Pilates-based exercises as their home exercise program?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I suppose there's a lot of things we would consider a Pilates exercise. I would consider a Pilates exercise in my head that you might consider to be a gym exercise as well, because there's a lot of crossover. But I think definitely early on in the piece, for me, Pilates is all about movement quality as well. So there's always that movement quality that's super important. So I'd prefer someone went home with one exercise that they did beautifully, then I'd maybe, even if they need to work on strength, we might not do 10 exercises. We might do one where they just do that twice a day, perfectly working on control, and then progress more into the strength side of things further down the track. So I suppose that's where the Pilates comes into it. I mean, a lot of the time with shoulders, I probably wouldn't say I use my specific Pilates training initially, because it's all about, it's still the movement pattern and quality is important, but it is more, you know, general shoulder rehab, but then moving more into Pilates down the track. But definitely with the back pains or hip or anything that's more trunk related, it'd definitely be Pilates based to begin with, I would say.
Yeah. And I think that we spoke about that in one of our earlier episodes, was that continuum of care almost, isn't it? And where it fits in from probably, you know, hands-on manual therapy at one end into your Pilates movement quality, and then into a bit more loading towards the end. Obviously there's a lot of overlap there, but they're
and we obviously we share a couple of patients, myself and Reece, and you know, there's a guy that I was working with quite a long time, and he came to us, you know, literally 3 weeks after fusion, and he's now doing a lot of S&C based stuff with Reece, but actually then it's about, well, can you then use the Pilates as a check-in to make sure he's not falling back into older habits, whilst he's then increasing his load. So it doesn't have to be sort of stop, start, and that's where they kind of fit together really nicely, because you will find that by breaking it down and looking at the control and the quality element that Annabel's talking about, you will then always be able to do better patterning in your squat, your deadlift, your leg press, the lunge, all of that sort of thing, which will always help everybody.
And I mean, I've got a patient who's been a really fit gym kind of going guy, has had recurrent tendon issues, so he's been seeing physio for multiple tendon issues, and we sort of worked out eventually that his movement patterns are just not correct, and he's overloading himself, and so actually just breaking down what he should be doing in each movement, which is definitely something a good S&C could do as well, but then putting him on the equipment to actually give him that support to work on dissociating his hip movement from his trunk movement, so that he gets the concept of, okay, in a squat, when my leg moves, the rest of my body doesn't necessarily have to move, or it can move, and being able to feel what's happening so that he can correct a lot more effectively.
I guess having that ability to move things together or disassociate them is really important, and that's, from an S&C point of view, I guess it's an issue we see a lot of the time, especially in guys, and as a male I'll put my hand up, but you know, that breakdown, especially lumbo-pelvic rhythm, that type of stuff, people just move as a block, and so being able to break that down is really important.
And I think, you know, one of the reason it's sometimes easier in the studio is because if you have the equipment, those springs make it less than body weight. So if you don't know how to squat, and you're trying to teach them how to squat, but it's the same movement, and they're just not getting it, and it's all the same stuff, then actually, if you can make it significantly more assistive, and you can take away some of that weight, then they're more likely to be able to find the movement that they need. So it's just this really nice place of being able to, you know, make someone 20 kilos lighter for half an hour.
And I mean, conversely as well, you know, you've got some guys who are like, well, I've just been doing bodyweight squats for weeks, and I'm so sick of it, and I just want to push on. So you can throw them on the reformer, where they're much more supported, chuck some springs on, and actually make them feel like they're using their legs, so they feel like, okay, actually I'm using my muscles, but then still, because they've got the support of the machine, being able to still work on that hip dissociation or that lumbo-pelvic position or whatever you're trying to work on, because there's just that extra support around them, and they have so much more feedback because they've got the support of the equipment.
That feedback's important, isn't
and
it?
it's so helpful for the hypermobiles. It makes a huge difference.
That, especially on the reformer, where you're getting that input from both ends. I think that just switches an area of the nervous system on that you just can't get in more sort of, you know, open from one end movements, and that's really important.
Yeah, agreed.
So you mentioned before, Annabel, you've been a Pilates user yourself. So I guess you were sort of, before your physio training, you already had good exposure to it. Helen, were you a Pilates person before? No, not at all.
No, not at all. So I didn't even really know what Pilates was until I was working in rugby. And that's when we had a physio come in, and she worked on the equipment. So that's when I first got to know what it was, and I had loads of problems. I had problems with my lower back, I had problems with one of my hips, and part of it was because my nervous system is kind of on a little bit of high alert, because I've got some areas that are quite mobile and some areas that are quite stiff. And so I would go to these courses and I would be shaking like a leaf. And that was the first time I ever really experienced what Pilates, or clinical Pilates particularly, could be. Now I do go to, you know, I used to go to group reformer classes and that sort of thing, and actually when you understand how you can move or should move, you can go and do whatever you want. You know, I like barriers, I like all of that sort of thing.
Yep.
I've never been the one to kind of do one thing. I have sort of, you know, a little bit of an attention deficit thing. So I like trying new things, but Pilates has sort of stuck with me. But my biggest thing is how it then fits with actually functional movement and how you can then load people. And this is where my background is working with athletes comes in, because you can't just do Pilates with someone who needs to go and hit a scrum which weighs 900 kilos. So they need to lift weight. They have to add load, and no matter what you do, Pilates can't do that, which is fine. But it can do some of the other stuff that S&C can't, and
gives them the base to work with,
yeah, exactly.
And yeah, it's great with hypermobility. Like, well, I'm really hypermobile, and I find for me, I can load myself up a lot more on a reformer and not be sore in my joints or my tendons the next day than I would be if I did the same thing open chain in a gym. So I think definitely, for the guys that need that higher level stuff, you really need to load them up in the gym. But for some people, it's really helpful to get that baseline of strength before you can move into anything else.
There's no cheating on the reformer, is there? Like when you're getting that
well, it's a lot harder to cheat, that's for sure, especially if you're in a one-to-one setting.
So for instance, like a squat sort of pattern in the gym, you can compensate in so many ways. You know, you can go one leg more than the other, arch your back more, do all sorts of stuff. Whereas with the reformer, there's not as many places to hide.
No, there's not. And even if, you know, things like if you're going to push more with one side than the other, if the instructor's walking around the reformer and looking at you as a whole from all different angles, you see it really easily, because you see the difference in timing for when the knee extends, you see that there'll be a slight kind of increased pressure on the shoulder pad. So because there's so much feedback in doing it, you can pick up all of those different sheet systems.
And the feedback is great as well, because it means you can focus on one thing, whereas with a squat, as a hypermobile person, you're thinking about, okay, where are my shoulders, where's my back, where's my hips, where's my knees, where's my foot. Whereas if you sit yourself on a reformer or any of the equipment, you can kind of almost support most of your joints and go, right, now we're focusing on your knee range. So we're focusing on that ability to extend your knee to full extension without letting it flick into hyperextension, still working into that full range of extension that you have, but not pushing, you know, not dropping into it and being aware of it, which I think sometimes is hard when you're trying to control all your other joints at once.
So
isolates things a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
But then I guess isolated, but still integrating it into
and then you can kind of then reduce the support, and then obviously the goal would be to go to a squat eventually, which you could do, as Helen was saying, with support of springs or what have you, to take the body weight element out of it to a degree and then build forward. But
so you guys have come at it from different angles. You were exposed to it early, you came into it when your career had already started. I have some very basic Pilates training, very, very basic, but I actually really enjoyed it, and at some stage it is one of the courses on my list I do want to go on.
Careful, Reece.
I know exactly, it might convert me. So for therapists listening to this, especially maybe new grad therapists or students, when in the training, I mean, I've got my ideas on this, but when in their training, when in the course of their career, would you recommend jumping along and getting into a Pilates course? Do we think it's get 12 months of experience, see some bodies, and then go and do it? Or is it do it as early as we possibly can, get exposed to it?
From my perspective, I think it probably depends on where you're at with your movement generally. So if you're someone that has always done dance or gymnastics and has a bit of awareness of movement, you're going to be biased towards that sort of Pilates idea anyway. So I think you could definitely jump straight in. But having said that, in some ways for me, like I feel like my gap in my knowledge now is kind of that S&C stuff. So I'll often then, you know, refer someone on to you for that high level rehab because it's something that I don't really do. So I suppose if you feel like you're really well versed in that side of things, then maybe do some S&C stuff first and then do the Pilates a little bit later. But I suppose I'm different to Helen in that I've always looked at movement quality from day dot, and I was 15 when I started doing Pilates. So for me, even before I did the formal course, I think it always coloured my physio practice anyway. So for me, I think as early as you can is helpful. But
so I guess it's different. So I always wanted to be more rehabby than diagnostics. I wasn't going to go down the Chris route of the ultrasound diagnostics, sonography, that sort of thing. I really love the movement side of it. the only way you get better at treating movement is by seeing movement. And I think that the length of time is really difficult to put your kind of eyes on, because you might go into a hospital and have the most incredible seniors who give you great opportunities and fantastic experience and really great courses and impart all this wisdom and knowledge, and you see huge volumes of patients, which means that you get so much more. Or you might be a community physio that's spending 10 hours of their day traveling and seeing 2 patients kind of thing. So I think it really, really depends. It also depends, we don't know what we want to do until we've done stuff.
Yep.
So I think getting the experience of all the different types of physio and what you can do, and I can say that I didn't actually do it, unfortunately. So I went straight from university into sports, but you just don't turn down that job. So, but I was with a team that was absolutely fantastic, and I always knew I wanted to do rehab.
Yep.
Because that was where I saw myself. I think if you want to go into things like women's health, or if you want to work with really acute spines and things, it's a great tool to have. But I think it's really important to not forgo the kind of normal exercises. And I would say that everybody should understand how to do basic rehab and teach simple compound moves before you then try and delve in and add another thing on board.
Yeah.
Which I think is really important.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest crimes in physio training.
Yeah,
Physios can graduate with not knowing how to teach someone how to deadlift or squat, which is it's an absolute crime.
It is, and the problem is people forget that a squat is sit to stand, and a deadlift is leaning over a cot, putting your kid to bed, or leaning over a bath, bathing them, or picking something out of the dishwasher. And how often do people say, "Oh, my back went when I did the dishwasher"? Yeah. Like, it's that. So you have to know those movements, and you never want to have in your head, don't squat, don't deadlift, because that's going to stop you doing so many functional things.
Yeah, it's just not called a squat or a deadlift in day-to-day life.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, it's an interesting, I would actually go as early as possible for exposure to Pilates, to be perfectly honest. I didn't have it for the first 7 years of my career, and the exposure I have had instantly made me a better therapist, instantly. And not even so much the prescription of exercises, but it was just a slightly different way of looking at people and moving. So even not in the studio, but in the room with people, there was just some little things that I was then able to pick up that I wouldn't have done pre that very basic Pilates training that I have. So it's still a hole that I'd like to fill, but I think, again, you were right, it depends what sort of therapist you do want to be. But so I sort of went away and did my S&C based stuff, but I think getting some kind of Pilates training, from my experience, is a great way to boost your knowledge and just boost your... Yeah,
and especially if you're working with, in pelvic health, is an amazing one. Anything to do with spines, if you're finding yourself kind of traveling down that route. Yep, sooner the better can be really good. But, it's, again, if you've got a great senior therapist working with you, then you can get an awful lot of that stuff out of your team. And we're really lucky in the fact that we have got this amazing team with so many different skills, so you can learn so much from the people around you. Yeah. So I think, it's often a trade-off between, do you do something cheap and badly? Do you do something well that's really expensive? Or do you spend some time with your team and figure out where you want to get to? And that's where you kind of need to decide from there.
Yeah, finding a mentor, isn't it? Because I mean, even so for those listening, during lockdown, we were doing team training. It was, sometimes it felt like bums and tums to me, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, he was still very, very sore.
Yeah. So we did via Zoom, 10 a.m, Pilates sessions, and I learned so much out of those sessions just by doing it. I wasn't leading the sessions. Helen and a few of the others were, and Annabel took quite a few as well. But there's little exercises I was like, I'm writing that down. I am writing that down, and that's in my repertoire now. So that was just such a really good way to learn. So there's lots of different ways to get that knowledge, isn't there?
Definitely.
Yeah. So just to wrap it up a little bit, Annabel, and talk about a few different things. What are the main things that you're using your Pilates for, conditions, compared to what you'd kind of go down a more traditional physio route for?
So in terms of bringing them into the studio and doing equipment-based Pilates,
particularly, I think the big ones, backs, of course, lower backs.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I've mentioned a few times already, but for me, hypermobility, I think it's an absolute game changer using the equipment. I've got quite a few patients that I'm seeing at the moment who are like, oh, I've never, we've now got them doing body weight squats. Like, I've never been able to do a squat before. I just couldn't do it because I couldn't work out where I needed to be. And we'd spent, 3 months breaking it down into different bits of the movement, and now they're aware of where every bit of themselves is in space, and so they can then start to do that. And yeah, just most of the things in the studio are really, there's not a lot of truly open chain stuff that you do, so it just gives you so much more feedback. So you can start to load them on a long lever because they have that bit more feedback, and they're actually keeping a bit of muscle contraction the whole time, so they're not hanging out in their joints and causing that aggravation that they'll often get from, say, going to the gym or going for a run or that sort of thing, with the goal obviously of getting them back to the gym or having a run. The other thing I find it super helpful for is for any condition, but when they've had chronic pain, because you can put them in a different position, and so it takes away that fear of the movement. So once again, to use the squat as an example, for someone with knee pain, say that I can't squat, if you lie them down on the reformer and get them doing basically a squat, but it's different, and they're concentrating on the reformer and how they're feeling, and you keep it super light to begin with, and then they get their confidence with that, and they can move into that position, and it no longer becomes a dangerous position for their body. And so it can be really helpful for desensitizing the nervous system. And I think the supportive nature of the equipment means that as a therapist, you can then put your hand on the joint you're trying to work on, because you're not actually worried about supporting them everywhere else at the same time. So you can actually give some really nice kind of tactile feedback to that area, which can often be really, really therapeutic in desensitizing the neural system around that area. So chronic pain is another one for me. And then I think the other one is just people who seem to have done a decent rehab plan. So they come in like, I've done this, and you look at them, you're like, you actually don't look too bad in the clinic and how you're moving, but obviously there's something not quite right. Let's see if we challenge you a little bit more, or make you move one limb on its own, how you can transfer that weight, how you can do all that sort of thing. So the ones who've seem to have failed, as it were, conventional physiotherapy, and you think, their physio's done a really good job, and I can't see why they're not improving. Sometimes they'll be really helpful to get in the studio and have a play in there and just put them in an unfamiliar environment and see how they move. And so they're probably the ones I would use it for. MDI, so multi-directional instability of the shoulder, it's fantastic for as well. Once again, so you can really support them in different positions and move them out of those sort of positions of danger and fear, so they can get the confidence. And I'll often sometimes use my phone, and I'll get them on the equipment, and I'll take a photo of them and be like, look, your arm is over shoulder height, but in this position on your tummy or on your back with the equipment. And they're like, and that's then really powerful to then give them the confidence to do some more rehab at home, because they feel confident that you've understood what's going on, you've been able to help them move into that position, and so they can go home and trust in your exercises that you've given them.
And I know we've spoken a lot about kind of the hypermobility, so the people with more range than they know what to do with, but kind of for those people with that stiffness or that arthritis, or you've had your ACL and you just can't quite get your knee range back or something, how do you think, so I obviously have my own views, how do you think it goes with that sort of thing?
I think that can be really fantastic as well, because once again, using the equipment, you can take out all their compensatory patterns that they've developed to try and avoid using that joint, and you can really, often people will feel there'll be one of two ways. They'll either feel like they're doing pretty well and not be that receptive to the fact that this joint isn't looking so great. And so you can put them somewhere which really exposes that to them and makes them realize, actually, now that I can't use my hip and my ankle and my back to compensate for the fact my knee doesn't move so well, I can really see that knee is not moving so well. Okay, I get that, and I have to move that a little bit more. Or they have the other sort of point of view, which is like, my knee being stiff has ruined my entire movement chain. And so conversely, you can kind of then set them up in a way that they can use both legs at once, and they can get that freedom of movement with a lot less weight, or even more weight sometimes, to help get that mobility, and move them away from the traditional movements that they've been trying to do for weeks on end.
I guess one thing that just really sparked in my head in the last few minutes that you've been chatting about is that it really fits under almost with that biopsychosocial side of things.
Definitely.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, you just spoke about language a little bit earlier and that type of thing, but just changing the context or position of doing exactly the same movement. It reduces that threat level.
And not calling it knee flexion. You know, like when we're in the clinic with our physio hats, I'm like, right, we're working on your knee flexion range right now. And they're like, right, that's my knee flexion range. Whereas you'll be like, okay, we're going to go on this cool machine where you slide and glide, and we're going to practice balancing. And they're thinking about so many other things that you suddenly go, look at your knee. Look how bent that is. Oh, it's bent or it's not bent.
Just distracted them.
And basically we've given so many things to think
distracted
about.
Them while their body does what it's supposed to do.
I think it's like, I'll actually, to the extent that sometimes I'll book a patient in, I'll look at who has got other people in, and I'll book them in with people that have either had something similar or just have great energy and are really enthusiastic. If I've got a patient that's a bit down, I'll go, right, this is a great time for them to come in, because they'll see all these other people who are in, and I can say to them, that person over there, they were in the same place as you 6 months ago, and look at them, look how well they're going, and they've done the same process, and you can get there. And it's the great thing about working in such a collaborative environment is you can use the energy in the studio to really encourage people and give people goals. And the amount of times I've had a patient who's looked at someone more advanced going, oh, when can I do that? I want to do that. That looks really fun. And you'll say, all right, well, the steps to do that are this exercise that you don't really like that we're going to work on, and then this one, and then this one, and they have a...
It's not a step, but I'm putting it in there anyway. Bit of trickery.
And I think it's a lot less medical. You know, like there's a lot of people in that. We do have a lot of people who are rehabbing injuries, but we also have fitness patients, clients, I suppose they are really, and you know, everyone's really always happy to be there, and everyone's there to exercise. So there's just that different mindset as well. Whereas I find, particularly compared to Australia, in the UK, a lot of people come in for physio expecting to lie down on the bed and have a massage. And so you've already got over that hurdle. If they're coming in for Pilates, they're expecting to move. So you don't have to try and get over that sort of barrier to begin with, which is really nice as well.
And I think that's kind of a really nice point, the fact that you're in a space with other people and you can see what other people are doing. And it's, you know, you have a one-to-one and there's very much a, you know, you're in your little bubble whilst you're kind of going around the studio and stuff. But quite often, if you're going through a long-term rehab program or kind of chronic pain or something like that, then you'll get to know some of the other people coming in at the same time. And half the time, like, there's a lot of laughter going on. I mean, we're all walking around in our socks, basically, you know, wearing pajamas to work because it's really nice.
Yoga pants.
Yoga
tights are standard.
I mean, standard.
This is very unusual for Annabel to be dressed quite nicely like this.
If you're listening to this rather than watching it, Annabelle's wearing slacks and a shirt, and
Helen's
I'm currently in hoodie and but it's nice, and you get clients taking the mickey out of each other just as much as you get the therapists taking the mickey out of clients, and vice versa. And that energy is a really nice place to be. And you know, that we have the luxury of time. We see people for 55 minutes, which is a very different kettle of fish than seeing them for sort of 27, 28. So that luxury of time means that people can slow, they can kind of pay a bit more attention to themselves.
Push.
Yeah,
and
rather
they can
than just
say, oh, by the way, my ankle's been a bit funny, and you don't go, oh, this has just ruined my entire day. You think, okay, great, we've got 55 minutes, let's have a look at this, let's incorporate this into your rehab. Whereas I know definitely, and you probably feel the same, Reece, you know, if you're treating someone for their knee or their back and you've got 28 minutes to see them, if they then come in with something else, you're thinking in your head, okay, how am I going to budget this time to look at their ankle, triage it, work out whether it needs to be seen, or whether we can kind of package it all the way in. And that's the great thing about Pilates, it is so holistic. And I'll often have patients come in like, by the way, now that this is getting better, can we sort out my shoulder, or can we look at this? And often, you know, we realize that it's very interrelated, and actually then starting to work on that will improve what's going on elsewhere as well. So it's really nice from that perspective.
Fantastic. All right, that's a pretty good chat. That it's very. If you're listening to this and you can hear that bell, it's actually our front doorbell. So that's what's
just
going
shows
on.
we're busy.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, indeed. All right, so that's part one of our chat with Annabel. Obviously covering off clinical Pilates. There's some really good things there for both therapists and patients. If you're listening, obviously Pilates can be used for a magnitude of different things, and can certainly be fit in as part of your rehab journey from injury back to performance and life as well.
And I think the thing for me is if you're not sure, like, we're always around for a chat. It doesn't mean you have to book an appointment, but if you're not sure about something, you want to know if it can help you. You want to know if maybe there's a different way of going about because you've sort of hit a plateau. Just get in touch, give us a call. We can chat through whatever it is and sort of see if it could help you.
If you want to get in touch with Annabel directly, it's Annabel.
Yeah, ANNABEL. at complete-physio.co.uk.
Perfect. Good place to wrap it up.
Brilliant.
Thanks for that.
Thanks,
Episode 2 coming up with Annabel, coming up soon. That concludes episode 4 of the Complete Health Podcast and the first of our 3-part series with Annabel. As always, for any further information or queries, please feel free to email into us at either reece@complete-physio.co.uk or helen@complete-pilates.co.uk. We're also on Instagram at Complete Health Podcast, which is all one word.
In our next instalment, we chat to Annabel about another area of her expertise, multi-directional instability of the shoulder, a commonly badly understood area by physios.
So for another week, stay healthy and goodbye.